Hello and welcome to another episode of Blu-ray Boutique. I'm your co-host Rosalie Lewis.
And I'm your other co-host, Tim Rosenberger.
And this month on the podcast, we had originally said we were hoping to do perhaps an interview or two, but we have changed our lineup at the last minute because we weren't able to line up the guests we were looking for. So no worries, we ended up switching to the topic of love in keeping with, this is a month where that's on our minds a little bit with the perhaps invented holiday, but Valentine's Day gets it on our minds, right? So, we thought maybe we would talk some love movies, and there's a lot to choose from, of course. That's one of the all-time themes of movie making, but we are going with two classics. So the first story is a story of non-romantic love, but still real love nonetheless, and that's going to be from Charlie Chaplin's movie The Kid from 1921. And the second one we're going to be talking about is a romantic story, one of the all-time classic romances, and that is 1955's Marty. So if you're looking for The Kid, you can find that on Criterion, and Kino has released Marty. So if you're looking for the physical releases of those, that is where you can find them. The first one we're talking about is The Kid. Now, if you haven't seen this movie, which came out in 1921, it is wonderful. It says at the beginning that, a few laughs and maybe a tear. And I think that completely sums up not just this movie, but in a lot of ways Chaplin's career, because he had really a knack for making us laugh, but then kind of hitting us right in the feels, right? So it's a short film, but it is his first feature-length film. It comes in at just under an hour, and I believe, right?
Well, we'll probably get into this a little bit because Chaplin later in his career in the 70s re-released a lot of his films, partially, well, for two reasons. One, to put musical scores onto his films that didn't have musical scores on them because they weren't doing scores at that point because they didn't have synchronized sound, and also to edit them down because Chaplin was always worried that modern audiences of that time would find his films long and boring and old and whatever, so he was cutting them down. So in The Kid, it was originally 68 minutes. He cut 15 minutes out of it. Criterion does have the deleted scenes on the DVD, well, at least some of them on there anyway. I don't remember them coming out to 15 minutes, but the scenes he has that are cut out are mainly with one of the side characters, played by Edna Purviance, who is a mother in the film, and her lover, who are the ones who produce the title character, The Kid. Those are primarily the scenes I think that are cut out of this release. So the original version, 1921 version, is 68 minutes. The re-release, I think, is 1972 version with the synchronized score, which is the one I recommend what people to watch primarily just because of the score and stuff. Has a synchronized soundtrack and a little bit of sound effects, and that is cut down to 53 minutes.
Yeah, I think that's the one that I watched tonight.
Yes.
I've seen the longer version before, but honestly, I couldn't remember what scenes were missing because I was like, I thought this was over an hour, and it was over in like 54 minutes. So that explains.
Yeah, it is. It's primarily, it's nice. The longer version, primarily, it fleshes out the Edna Purviance character a little bit more, and it gives more of a role to the biological father of the title character, and makes the character's first and only scene in the edited version gives a bit more of a payoff and stuff. But primarily, I don't know if there's tons that's cut between Chaplin and The Kid specifically.
So the brief background of the story, which plays out in this movie, I don't think it's one that really you can spoil, is that there's a woman who has a baby. She's not married, and she is sort of at a loss of what to do, so she pins a little note to the baby's chest and puts him in the back seat of a car at a rich person's house and says, please take care of my kid. But before the rich people can discover the baby, a couple of thieves steal the car, and then when they discover that there's an infant in it, they quickly dispatch him. And then, of course, the little tramp finds him and first is trying to get rid of him as well. But eventually, his heart is stolen, and he reads the note, and he decides to take him under his wing. And that's when, the real sweetness of this movie begins. Meanwhile, the child's mother, who's played by Edna Purviance, as you mentioned, she becomes an actress and does charity work. And so, of course, as fate would have it, the paths are going to cross again. So that's the basic premise.
And the older version of the kid, who's like 5 or so, is played by Jackie Coogan, and possibly his first role. I can't remember, but at least screen role. I think he was doing vaudeville stuff before that.
He would go on to become Uncle Fester on the Addams Family, which I think he's a little cuter as a child.
Well, probably he did. Yeah, he did kind of grow out of his face a little bit. He looks better with a mustache, though, I think. Though I know Chaplin was apparently, from what I've heard and read, was very complimentary about Jackie Coogan. He thought, I think, very highly of him, and I think they got along fairly well. There's a story which I think is true. I've never double checked it, but I think it's true that when Chaplin came back to the United States in the 70s to get his honorary Academy Award, he arrived, I think, at whatever airport it was. I'm assuming in California, and I think Jackie Coogan was there waiting for him. With Jackie Coogan was there with his wife, and Chaplin, I think, instantly lit up. He gave Jackie Coogan a great hug, and then he went to go hug his wife, and he said to Jackie Coogan's wife something along the lines of, "I hope you know your husband's a genius."
Yeah. Well, he puts on an amazing performance here for a child. I mean, I think he really was one of the first major child stars of the movies. And you can totally see why. Not only does he have just the most winsome little face, but he's also good at not just like the physical comedy, but also those more emotional scenes where, the threat of separation from the tramp is making him really sad and upset. And I think he plays both of those things really, really well.
Yeah, he does. And I haven't heard any stories about, because there's stories about another Jackie, a Jackie Cooper, who for the longest time I didn't realize they were different people. Jackie Cooper, there were stories about him doing some films where the directors would be a bit manipulative and tell him to stuff so he would cry. I've not heard any stories about Chaplin doing anything with Jackie Coogan. I think he just might have gotten him to do that, though I might be misremembering something. But I think if that's true, then I think that's a great credit to Jackie Coogan as an actor, that he could do that very emotional, raw kind of stuff in this movie as a, close to 5-year-old or a 5-year-old.
Well, I'm curious, Tim, since this was your pick, what drew you to this movie? I'm sure you'd seen it before, but what specifically about this movie called out to you?
I think that might have been the first feature film I saw of his, especially with the original score, not original score, but the score he later did. I loved it. Thought it was really funny. Thought it was really heart-wrenching, and I've always loved the relationship between the tramp and the kid in the movie. And it's kind of it's the humor. I've come to love it more as I've gotten older. I have certain issues with watching it, which we'll get to probably later, but that hurt my enjoyment of the film. But I think the film is still, it's brilliant, really. And I think I've said this in a previous podcast, that I think if you're going to show somebody, if you want to get somebody into Chaplin, or at least, very least, his feature films, I think start with this one. I mean, it's the first one he did, but also I think it's the most accessible, partially because of the relationship between the kid and the tramp.
Yeah, it's a fantastic introduction to Chaplin for sure. I'm trying to remember. I think my first Chaplin was City Lights, which is also fantastic, but it's a little bit longer. This one is, more straightforward and a little bit shorter, and you still get, the humor as well as the sweetness. So this is a great introduction. But yeah, I don't know. I've been trying to think about where this falls in my ranking of Chaplin movies, because I've seen quite a few, probably still have, some of the key ones I need to check off. But yeah, this has got to be probably top 5 for sure. I mean, it's wonderful.
Well, let's talk about some of the specifics why we love the film. So, I mean, we've talked about some stuff vaguely, but I mean, first off, this is primarily a comedy. It's a comedy drama. I think allegedly the first comedy drama, though that stuff you have to kind of take with a grain of salt, but allegedly the first time somebody tried to mix comedy and drama. I think it highlights very well Chaplin's ability to take objects and people and use them in ways you don't expect. Like, there's a scene where the kid gets in a fight with because they're living in very poor conditions or whatever. So another kid steals Jackie Coogan's toy dog, and he throws it away. So then Jackie Coogan and the other kid get into a fight, and at one point, the tramp comes out, and eventually, at first it was like, oh no, you shouldn't be fighting this kid, and then eventually gets kind of into it, and it's kind of egging him on and stuff. And at one point, when Coogan gets kind of away from the kid for a second, he backs up to a window where I guess there's some sort of strain across the window or something, and they kind of almost use this, you don't really think much of it, and then he leans up against it, and then Chaplin kind of uses it as like a boxing ring, thing where he's, the kid is leaning against it, and the tramp is like waving, it's like waving some air in his face or whatever as he's resting and stuff, which is hilarious. And then, there's other stuff, visual gags, like when he first finds the kid as a baby, and he's trying to figure out what to do, he kind of just sits down on the sidewalk, and he sees a grate, like a sewer grate, opens it up for a second, kind of looks down in it, then looks back at the baby, and then thinks to himself for a second, and then like shakes his head, and then closes the sewer grate again. And that's just, a bit dark, but also just really funny. It's stuff like that you can maybe see. You can see that and not maybe be surprised when and if you learn that Chaplin spent a painful amount of time working out movies and rehearsing them both offset, and then back when he gets onto the set, messing with every single prop and figuring out all the funny things he can do with it, and just painfully working out everything. You can kind of see that, I think, with this, where he's finding the best ways to use everything around him for comedy gags and stuff.
Yeah, he really uses everything on the set to add to the humor, because, you have the various structures, right? Which I think the fight is a great example of that, because when the tramp gets into a fight with the older brother of the kid that is fighting the little John, the older brother, by the way, he looks super old. He's probably, I looked it up. He was actually 34 at the time. He looks like he's in his 40s or 50s. But anyway, when those two are fighting, like, somebody punches the light post and it bends, and like a brick wall just like topples over. And I'm sure that part of it is that they're living in this like poverty-stricken area, that nothing is real sturdy, but also I think it's funny because it looks almost cartoonish.
It's very Looney.
Bending.
It's kind of like a Looney Tunes like thing there, where some certain laws of science don't really apply.
Exactly. Well, people can get hit over the head with bricks and they don't die. They just kind of potter off. So that adds to the whole Looney Tunes feel. But yeah, it's very effective nonetheless. And there's a lot of great foot chase scenes and, interactions between various people, often the police in this movie. The tramp is constantly, trying to escape or evade the cops because, either misunderstandings or he legitimately has done something, that they don't approve of. First, it looks like he's abandoning the kid, which he's really just the one that found the kid. Then he tries to pawn the kid off on a lady who has a little baby carriage, and she gets upset. So then the cop comes over there, and then at another point, he's doing his little window repair business, which is a fun little scam in itself, and starts flirting with a lady that turns out to be the police officer's wife. So that doesn't always end well for him either. But very entertaining to see all those little interactions.
The emotional content in it, though, primarily the stuff after when they try to take the kid away and stuff, it's just so, I think, endearing because because again, it was the thing that kind of helped endear me to the film, is that, this, I guess one thing I personally love is characters who are very loyal and who, would die for other characters and stuff like that. And the tramp is very much like that in this film, is that he will do anything to stay with this kid, and he will, not be separated from him, and he will go to the ends of the earth to stay with the kid and protect him. And I think that is still very effective for audiences today, whether you are a parent or not. Because I was like a teenager when I first saw this film, so I think it could speak to people of most demographics.
I have to talk about the dream sequence.
Oh, God.
That is one of my favorite things in this movie, and I hear you groaning, so I wonder if we disagree about it.
Well, we can talk about that. I don't maybe disagree as much as you think I do, but we'll get into that and some other stuff that are slightly related to the dream sequence that are more serious.
Okay.
But
so the dream sequence is basically, when the tramp gets separated for a time from the kid, and he falls asleep, basically like looking for him. He's on the step of his old house. And then we don't really have necessarily any visual clues that he's dreaming, other than the scene just changes. there's suddenly flowers everywhere. The little kid comes out of the door wearing these angel wings, and then the first sign that we get that this is not real life is a little dog that also has angel wings that just starts flying around. And that's one of my favorite things that happens in this movie is the flying dog. So,
Mm.
the neighbors and various people in his life are appearing as angels or devils, and then of course eventually he wakes up. But I enjoy that sequence. It's a
It
little odd, but I like it.
I mean, I go back and forth on that scene. I think the not this past time when I rewatched it, but the time before that when I showed it to my wife and stuff, I didn't find it as odd, but I was more into it. This time I wasn't as into it because it's just, I mean, it's so random, really. It's like, why are we having this dream sequence? And I've seen reasons why it's in there and why it can help with, I don't know, ideas of, I forget what the explanations were, but like this idea of innocence and losing innocence or whatever. But I just think it's so, I know like I'm gonna eventually show it to another friend down the road at some point, and I know because especially since she's not hasn't seen a lot of films, that I know her reaction to that when that scene comes up is going to be what?
Yeah.
Because and because she says that a lot, I know she's probably going to react that way to that scene because it is just. I just don't know why it's in the movie. I mean, it's just totally different from the rest of the film. And again, I go back and forth. I don't hate the scene. I just think it's odd and a bit random, and maybe could if you want to do something having to do with loss of innocence or whatever, then I don't know, maybe do it a slightly different way. I almost think that Chaplin almost did it so he could do some gags with flying and stuff. I think he just came up with an excuse to use it. I mean, I could be wrong, but part of me almost cynically thinks that's maybe why he put it in the movie.
Well, that's certainly possible. I mean, it is impressive to see him, flying through the air, and I mean, we know that it was accomplished with trickery and all, but it's still, I think, probably at the time looked pretty impressive. So I
No, yeah.
am using that for
No, I
sure.
think it's still impressive, and they hide the strings. I mean, there's obviously strings connected to like him and the dog and stuff like that, but they hide
Right.
them. They hide them fairly well. So, and he does some impressive dance like stuff with the flying and stuff, which is nice.
Yeah. I'm just always a sucker for anything that's sort of surreal and unexpected. So I think that, seeing a dog with angel wings flying through the air, you can't go wrong, in my
Uh,
opinion.
well, that's why you like David Lynch so much.
Exactly.
Uh, okay, so while we're on the topic of this scene, I feel the need to and I almost don't want to bring it up because this episode is supposed to be about love and positive things and all that stuff. But I do feel the need to address a bit of an elephant in the room when it comes to Chaplin. For anybody who knows Chaplin, brilliant filmmaker, brilliant actor, brilliant editor, writer, composer, comic genius, blah 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 blah. It's very uncomfortable when you learn about his private life.
Very.
Married 4 times. Fourth wife was 18. He was 50 something. Third wife was in her 20s, so of age, and he was whatever it was, 40, whatever. His other two marriages more uncomfortable. His second being the most uncomfortable because he was like 37 and began a relationship with a 15-year-old.
Yeah.
And that woman who went by the stage most of her life went by the stage name Lita Gray, I believe, was 12 in this. And to be fair, I don't think, far as I know, I think just had her in the film. I think I read that he originally, according to her, originally met her when she was 8 or something at a restaurant for some reason I'm not aware of. She was cast in this film. As far as I know anyway, I think it was an innocent little thing. She was just in the film. Uh, blah 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 blah. But I partially bring it up because she is kind of cast as this kind of temptress, flirty angel at the age of 12 with this 32-year-old guy. Because the problem I've had with Chaplin growing as I've gotten older is I've gotten more uncomfortable with that stuff, and it's harder for me to watch his films and to enjoy them, especially since he is the star of most of them. So I can't really, because somebody with you have questionable people in movies like Woody Allen and stuff like that. But Woody Allen doesn't star in all of his movies, so sometimes it's a bit easier to disconnect who's making the film. Whether that's a good thing to do or not, you can kind of forget about it sometimes. Chaplin, it's harder because he's the star of most of everything he makes. So it's harder for me to enjoy his films as I've gotten older, and it's hard for me to enjoy this one, which really kind of pisses me off because I think it's a brilliant film, and it's hard for me to enjoy it sometimes because he was kind of a creeper.
Yeah.
So does that has that affected your enjoyment of Chaplin films as a whole, and specifically again this film where again he is getting kind of lovey-dovey with uh, this 12-year-old.
So I hadn't thought about that particular scene, but I guess it's good that you're bringing that up because I had forgotten about that little connection. I've known for, years now that he was a creeper, and I've listened to the podcast about it on, like You Must Remember This did a great series on it, and several others as well, to kind of delve into his grossness. It's hard, right? Because he was a brilliant filmmaker, he was a pioneer, but at the same time he had these personal, characteristics that were somewhat predatory to say the least.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, it's tough to think about that and still be like, oh, it's just a little tramp. So I will say that overall, I think I prefer, in terms of human beings, I prefer Harold Lloyd. I prefer Buster Keaton.
Yeah.
I think Chaplin was gifted, but definitely major flaws. The only thing I can say is that I think everybody else that worked on these movies deserves to have their work remembered and celebrated and appreciated.
Mm-hmm.
And even the women in his life, many of whom did appear in his films or were contributors behind the scenes, they also were involved, right?
Yeah, and
so
they were, and in certain cases were very talented. Like
yeah.
Paulette Goddard, his third wife, was very talented.
So I don't want to write off completely the work that went in, and I also feel like, and maybe this is me taking the easy way out, but the fact that it is something that happened a long time ago to people who are no longer here. Nobody who was creepy is making profits from this movie, as far as I know, and we can't save the people that were harmed by Chaplin's actions by not watching the movies. So I've sort of made peace with it that way, but I still definitely find him to be an uncomfortable person.
Yeah, and I don't bring this up to be like a killjoy or anything, but I think it's just important too. I guess the reason, I don't know, I like to bring it up, partially because it's a conflicting thing with me. I've been trying to deal with, especially the past couple years, especially considering how much I hate people like Roman Polanski. It does seem sometimes a bit hypocritical from my end to promote Chaplin in this way, but also I think it's important to. I think certain people are rightfully criticized about some of the horrible stuff they've done in their personal life. Again, like Roman Polanski and Woody Allen, but I think sometimes for Chaplin, we like to brush over that still, even with stuff like the Me Too movement and stuff like that. I think we still like maybe to brush over that a bit too much. So I think it's important to. I feel obligated to mention that again, brilliant filmmaker, but just yeah, I think like you mentioned in a previous podcast, not a good dude. So
Right.
yeah. Anyway, though, to get past that uncomfortable subject, let's talk a little bit about because to talk about some of the women in his life, let's talk a little bit about Edith Purviance. Have you seen much of her in any of the other stuff she did, whether it be Chaplin related or because I know she starred in the I always forget what article they use, Women in Paris or Women of Paris or whatever. She stars in that as the title character. Had you seen much of her work otherwise?
I saw The Immigrant, so I would have seen her in that, and I want to say I saw her in A Dog's Life, right? She's in that one, although I don't know that she has a major role. I have not seen Chaplin's two later movies that she starred in, Monsieur Verdoux and Limelight. And I know that she has small roles in those, but not major. Yeah, I don't think I was super familiar with her outside of this one. This is the most
You've seen
memorable one that I've seen her in. Yeah.
I think she's fairly good at. I mean, she doesn't really do anything. She's kind of a straight man. If she is involved in comic scenes, she's more of the straight man in the stuff. She sets up jokes with Tramp, and I think particularly the older brother of the little bully and stuff. She sets up gags with them and stuff. But mainly she's there for dramatic effect and stuff. But I think she does have a comic talent and is very good in these emotional scenes of, especially in the beginning of the movie, where she's kind of this distraught mother who can't support her child and doesn't really want to give the baby up, but then has to, and then like almost instantly regrets it, but then can't get the kid back. And I think that handles those scenes very well.
And to quote a certain character we're going to be talking about later, she has a nice face.
She does, and she has a very expressive one too. Which also, to get back to Coogan for just a moment, he also has a very expressive face too. But yeah, she's very. It's undersung thing, I think, sometimes with silent people, just how expressive their faces are, except for Keaton, I suppose.
She doesn't overplay the emotion either, which I appreciate. I mean, I guess you could say maybe fainting was more of a thing that happened in those times to demonstrate somebody's emotion, but in terms of her facial expressions or her, you know, mouthing stuff, she doesn't overplay the drama. She just seems to
No.
be having genuine emotion about it.
No, I think, except for, I mean, I think Chaplin, from the movies I'm thinking of anyway, I think was, at least in stuff he was directing and later on in his career, certainly, I think was fairly good at not over-exaggerating stuff. If he ever exaggerates stuff, he's maybe exaggerating comic expressions on people's faces and the comic moves. But usually, if you're seeing a huge emotional thing that's serious, usually it's justified. Like the scene where the kid is being taken away from the tramp and stuff. That's justifiable that you're seeing this big outpour of emotion. But usually, I think otherwise, except for small stuff like you said, the fainting, he's fairly good with actors in terms of they don't overplay it.
The other thing I wanted to highlight was the intertitles. I think Chaplin's intertitles are something really special.
Mm-hmm.
And I haven't seen this type of sort of commentary the way that I see it in his. So, for example, you know, when it introduces the mother character, it says her sin being a mother,
Mm-hmm.
right? Or her sin motherhood. You know, it has that little like societal critique kind of built
Mm-hmm.
into it. And even the introduction of a picture with a smile and perhaps a tear, like it sets the mood. I just think that there's a real skill there to not just putting story beats on the intertitles, but also kind of cluing the audience into what he's going for.
Yeah, there was oh god, I think I'm getting the right name. David Robinson, I think, who is a Chaplin biographer, wrote probably the best known Chaplin biography, which I think is just called Chaplin, in I don't know, 70s or something, like 70s, 80s, something like that. Big phone book size of a biography, and to spend most of his life studying Chaplin and researching him, and might have been instrumental in finding some of his old films and stuff like that. I saw him say in the commentary for the Criterion commentary for Modern Times how efficient Chaplin was with intertitles.
Mm-hmm.
For an example of that, in Modern Times, at one point somebody asks a question and then you just see that play out, and then somebody answers that character, and then you see the answer. But with the answer being phrased the way it is, you can get what the question was. So you didn't have to show the question, he could just show the answer, and that was sufficient enough. So, and you see that in this film, there's very little there's very little in terms of dialogue. Mostly it's commentary. And beyond that, it's just all told visually.
What happened? What happened? Hey Marty! Hey Marty! Hey Marty! What happened with you? Saturday we had a party. A party! Frankie and Lou, everybody but you. Where was you Thursday? Hey Marty! Hey Marty! Hey Marty, for our bowling game. It seems like a year since we chugged a lot of beer. Hey Marty, you must have a dame, a dame.
Okay, so for our next and final film, we're going to be talking about the 1955 Best Picture Oscar-winning film Marty, which was directed by Delbert Mann and was written by Paddy Chayefsky. Paddy Chayefsky, this was based on a 1953 teleplay, which is a live TV program. I think it was around an hour. I think about an hour long. This is 90 minutes, so they added material onto it. It is stars Ernest Borgnine and Betsy Blair. Ernest Borgnine is a New York butcher who is, I think, 35 in the film. The Borgnine was a little bit older, but the character is 35, and everybody in his life, his mother, his customers, his family is all getting on him about that he's not married yet. And he just spends his nights rather at home with his mother watching the hit parade, or going out with his friend Angie, who's played by Joe Mantle, who was nominated for Best Supporting Actor for this, for reasons I don't understand, which is not a slight to him. He just doesn't do much in the movie. But he goes out with Angie to dance halls and stuff, and tries to date women without really any success whatsoever. And the film opens with all that stuff still happening, and his mother insists that he goes out to a dance hall.
Oh, Marty, put on the blue suit, huh?
Blue suit, gray suit. I'm just a fat little man, a fat, ugly man.
You not ugly.
I'm ugly, I'm ugly, I'm ugly.
Marty.
Ma, leave me alone!
Ma, what do you want from me? What do you want from me? I'm miserable enough as it is. All right, so I'll go to the Stardust Ball. I'll put on a blue suit and I'll go. And you know what I'm going to get for my trouble? Heartache. A big night of heartache.
He goes out on the dates, and he meets up with a woman called Claire, played by Betsy Blair, who is dumped by probably one of the biggest assholes in movies.
Yeah, totally.
And Marty tries to console her, and they get to talking and dancing, and most of the rest of the movie is just them kind of out on a date, talking to each other about problems they're having. Like, Marty wants to buy the butcher shop he works at is going to be sold. The owner wants to sell it, and he wants to buy it, but he's unsure about that. And Betsy Blair, Claire, who is a teacher in New York, is thinking about, I guess, getting promoted, but is reluctant to do that, and she's reluctant to leave her parents' house. And Marty also lives with his mother, and she's reluctant to leave her parents and move out of the house, and she's about, I think, 29. And they just get to talking and getting to know each other and falling in love and laughing and all that stuff. So I'm curious. I think I pretty much know what you're thinking of this movie, but I had seen this many times before. I recently did. If people are curious, I'll link to it in the description for this podcast. I did a video review of it recently where you can see, I guess, fuller thoughts on it. But so this is very fresh in my mind. I've seen it a number of times. I love it. This is, I think, your first time watching it at all, right, Rosalie?
It is my first time watching it at all. I had never seen it. In fact, I didn't even realize until you suggested it for this podcast that it was a romance. I don't know how I avoided knowing any plot details whatsoever. All I knew was that Ernest Borgnine is in it, and he's on the cover with his smile and his cigarette, and that was all I had. I knew it had won, Best Picture and that sort of thing, but I didn't really have much more information. So I went into it as blind as one could, and I loved this movie. It's so good. From really just the opening scene where you see him in the butcher shop getting harangued by these women that are like, you should be ashamed of yourself. Your younger brother's married, your older brother's married, your sisters are married. Why aren't you married? Why aren't you having kids? And, who can't relate to having had that conversation with some older relative or friend of the family at some point in your early life? So, seeing that and then seeing him go home and be, kind to his mom, go upstairs, take that phone call to a girl he doesn't even really want to go out with. He's just kind of calling her as a favor to his friend. But then he's on the phone and you don't hear her half of the conversation. But he says things, the way he says them and the way his face looks when he says them, like, do you recall me? I'm glad you recall me. Just even that phrase I really found touching somehow. And then you can sense that he's being rejected and his eyes close and he just gets this completely stricken look on his face. And he's been down this road so many times before, and it's just, your heart breaks for him at that moment.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you why I called. I was figuring on taking in a movie tonight, and I was wondering if you and your friend would care to see a movie tonight with me and my friend. Yeah, tonight. Well, I know it's a little late to call for a date, but I didn't know myself to... Yeah, I know. Yeah, well, what about... Well, how about next Saturday night? Are you free next Saturday night? Well, what about the Saturday after that? Yeah. Yeah, I know. Well, I mean, I understand it. Yeah.
And so from then on, I was in Marty's corner. I just wanted him to, find a girl and fall in love and, and have a happy life because he deserves it.
We'll probably talk quite a bit about the kind of brilliance of Paddy Chayefsky's script, because that's really what makes the film. One of the things that Chayefsky does very well is capturing kind of the awkwardness of dating, because it can be very awkward and very uncomfortable at times, especially in circumstances like this where you're half-heartedly or full-heartedly asking somebody out and they just reject you cold, and it can be horrible. And credit to Borgnine too for capturing that moment as realistically as they can. And I think that really carries over to much of the rest of the film, where I think the brilliance of the movie is that, for the most part, and we'll get into a subplot that I don't like, but the most part, it's very true to life, and it's just all very natural, and there's not really any bullcrap in it. and it just captures this very real situation that a lot of people find themselves in a very non-Hollywood way. And I mean, one of the things that this is best known for, and it kind of created a kerfuffle at the time, was the fact that, I mean, Ernest Borgnine is not conventionally attractive. Betsy Blair isn't conventionally attractive, but the romantic leads of this movie that eventually went on to win Best Picture. And so the fact that you don't have two people who are, Hollywood attractive is more relatable, and just that you don't have all these for the most part, we don't have all these contrivances that you would usually see in a film. It's for the most part, is just two people going on a date, and I think that is just brilliant of the film that Patty Chayefsky was brave enough to do that, but also that he makes it work as well as he does.
And their early scenes together where, they are having, a good time, but they're still kind of awkward with each other, where, one of them, of course, Borgnine, Marty, can't stop himself from talking. And even notices he's talking too much, and then he's like, okay, I'm going to shut up now and let you talk. And then he keeps on.
That is possibly my favorite scene in the movie. I love that scene so much. It is... Again, it is so true to life, where you find yourself like that. Maybe not quite that degree where you're talking that much and commenting on it, but just the fact that you can just get on a roll with somebody and a dime, because he's doing all that stuff where he's talking. And Betsy Blair is brilliant in that scene, by the way, because she doesn't really say almost anything, but you can see her finding it slightly humorous in this very adorable, endearing way. And it's just, she's great in that scene. It's a great example of an actor who doesn't have any dialogue but is playing it perfectly well and brilliantly, but he's saying all this stuff and it's really funny and stuff, and then he switches on a dime to just saying that she's pretty and stuff, and it's so sweet and so great. I mean, again, possibly my favorite scene in the movie.
I never talked so much in all my life. Usually everybody comes up to me and tells me all their troubles. Well, I'm going to shut up now and let you get a word in. Yeah, 17 years ago. What I've been doing myself all that time? Well, there I go again. I must be driving you crazy. Most of the time I'm with a girl, I can't find a word to say. Well, I'm going to shut up now and let you get a word in. Because usually I'm not like this. Usually there I go again. I can't stop talking. I'm on a jag, for Pete's sake. You'd think I was loaded. Well, anyway, like I started to say, I can't stop my mouth. Isn't this stupid? You got a real nice face, you know? Really a nice face.
Thank you.
It's really relatable, too, to anybody who has been on one of those magical first dates where, everything is just clicking and you just feel that chemistry, you feel that connection. You haven't had it before, maybe, and, the other person is listening to you, and so you find yourself pouring your heart out and talking about things that you've probably had bottled up for ages. In this case, years probably, right? Marty's never been able to talk about these things he can't talk to his mom about it. She wouldn't understand. His brother-in-law has his own problems, which I'm sure we'll get to. And, he has his friends who all, just want to talk about Mickey Spillane and
his friends, I'll point out also, his friends are all jerks. The friends, I don't know why he hangs out with any of these people. He is surrounded by so many a-holes, anyway.
Yeah. No, he's like the only good guy in the
group,
movie, it seems like. Yeah. But no, and it's relatable, just that euphoria that you get, and you just find yourself opening up in a completely new way. And then you see the other person's reaction, and they're being encouraging, and they're listening, and they're smiling, and they're responding to you. I can totally relate to that.
And even if you're not talking about anything important, if you're just talking about nothing, I mean, literally, it's nothing of importance, and the person is still really into the conversation, you can see that they don't care. They're as interested as you are about talking about really nothing of substance at all, but you're having a good time, they're having a good time. And again, like you said, it's just that magical thing where you can get with both, I think, romantic nights and non-romantic nights. I've had that with friends where everything just clicks and you're having a great time. And, and you could see that in this movie, and you could see, I mean, I think they have some of the best romantic chemistry in a movie that I've seen.
Yeah.
They play off each other very well. I mean, it's partially a testament to how brilliant of actors they are.
They also get to be really vulnerable with each other. There's that scene in the coffee house where, they have been talking about light-hearted things, and then Marty talks about wanting to, fall in front of a train. Like, he goes pretty dark, and she's nodding. She can relate. She knows how he feels. So it gets pretty dark, it gets pretty vulnerable, but you can tell that these two people, you know, they can relate even on those really heavy levels because they both felt that rejection, they both felt that isolation.
And two, I think that's also again something that's true to life, at least in my experience, where you can start the night out with, partially because you're more on high energy, you're kind of on this high somehow anyway, so you almost feel like, you know, you've had 12 cups of coffee, and then you get into the night, you get more tired and stuff, and maybe partially because of that, you start talking about more serious things, and you kind of get into this serious conversation, not necessarily about wanting to kill yourself, but about just serious stuff about your life. And so I think he captures that brilliantly, because again, like you said, it starts with them talking very, you know, humorously about Marty's time in the army, and they're laughing, and then you have this fade away and to where they're talking seriously about this stuff. And again, it's just a perfect observation of how that stuff works.
And the dialogue, like you said, Patty Chayefsky writes, you know, an excellent script here. The dialogue is absolutely note perfect because it feels like a real conversation that you could have or you could overhear, you know, in a diner on a Saturday night. It doesn't feel stagey, or, you know, they aren't trying to like cram character details into the dialogue unnaturally. It's all just feeling very organic to the scene. Yeah, I watched it last night and I actually thought about putting it on again today because I loved it so much. Yeah, it's great.
I would say the only things I don't like, there's two things I don't like about the movie. There's a moment where he brings Clara home and they're talking and stuff, and things get a bit emotional, and Marty wants to kiss Claire, and she doesn't really want to do it, and it gets very uncomfortable as he kind of tries to do it.
No, Marty, please.
I like you. I've been telling you all night I like you.
Marty.
All I want's a little kiss.
No.
Please.
No.
Please.
No, Marty.
All right. I'll take you home. All I wanted was a lousy kiss. Do you think I was going to try something serious? My mother coming home any minute?
Later, they kind of break off, and he kind of goes to sit down somewhere else in his house, and is all sad and stuff. And to be fair to Piacheski and Double Man and the actors, they don't try to justify this forced kiss thing, but it is uncomfortable and does kind of tread on, from stuff Marty says, almost treads on to the kind of friend zone bullcrap. I think it's a misstep in the writing. I mean, I'm not terribly surprised it's in a 1955 film, but it is a bit comfortable. For me, it was uncomfortable from our 2021 perspective.
Yeah, that moment was a little awkward, but I didn't hate it, and the reason I didn't hate it is because it felt believable for both characters. It feels believable that Marty feels like things have been going well. They've been out for 3 hours. You know, they're getting along great. She's seeming to respond. I'm not surprised he would try to lean in for a kiss, but I can also see why she, having been rejected so many times and she's alone in this house with the guy she just met, is thinking, okay, maybe we're moving a little too fast. His reaction is disappointing, but I also think he does hang out with all those guys that are reading the girly magazines and constantly hitting on chicks, and I don't think it's too surprising that somebody who's in that environment is kind of lashing out a little bit.
Yeah. And it's partially the way they do it, because their music gets kind of intense, and he gets kind of intense in his, I just want a little kiss, blah, 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 and that just gets, that's part of the problem, too. If it was more of it just he leans in kind of quietly for a kiss, and she says no, and he gets a bit upset, it wouldn't be as bad, but they play it almost like it's supposed to be a bit kind of off-putting. I don't think it's supposed to be from their perspective, but they kind of almost unintentionally play it that way with the music and Borgnine's choices. But again, I don't think it ruins the movie. It just is maybe a bit of a misstep that I wish wasn't there. But the other thing I don't like about the movie, which is more of a problem, and is also in the 1953 teleplay, where there's the subplot with Marty's mother, who initially wants him to get married and wants him to have children, blah blah blah. It takes in her sister because her daughter and her son-in-law, they're living with her, the aunt, and they just can't stand it because she's just being unbearable and overbearing and controlling their lives. So they ask Marty's mother to take the aunt in a very humorous way, because the sister says, "Oh, can't you just take her in for 4 to 5 years?" And the actress's delivery of that line is just perfect. But anyway, the mother eventually agrees to take her in and stuff. And then the aunt is not an idiot. She knows what they're doing. They're just trying to shove her off on somebody else and stuff. And when Marty's mother goes to meet her at the Marty's sister's apartment, the aunt kind of plants seeds of doubt in the mother's head about how horrible it is to be a widow because both of them, their husbands have died. And once Marty's out of the house, I mean, who are you going to have to, you're not going to have anybody to cook for, anybody to, there's going to be nobody in the house and blah, blah, blah. So then Marty's mother becomes reluctant to have Marty go with this woman, with Claire, and she comes up with excuses why he shouldn't be with her and stuff like that. Personally, I just really hate that story, that subplot. It's really the only thing I have a strong dislike of the film, because I know it helps make the film a feature-length film. It adds a bit more conflict in the final act, because there's a question. Marty starts listening a bit too much to these people, to his mother and to some of his friends who think Claire isn't, she's not attractive, blah, 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 she's a dog, blah, you shouldn't be with her, and all this stuff. And he starts to think, he kind of listens to them a bit too much, and maybe doesn't call Claire back when he says he's going to and stuff. So I know it does that. It adds feature length time, running time to it. It adds a conflict. But to me, at least the way they handle it, maybe you could have this in the movie and it could be fine. But my problem with it was that it was so contrived the way they did it. Like, there's a scene where near the end of the movie where the aunt is at Marty's house and she's talking to the mother in the kitchen, and she says, "Oh, at some point he's going to say, that the house is falling apart and that we should move and find a little apartment somewhere else in the city." And then 5 seconds after that, Marty comes in and basically says, "Oh, this house is falling apart. We should sell the place." And it's disappointing when so much of the rest of the film was very real and true and all that stuff. And then we have this not like a movie in some of those contrived ways. And then you have the subplot, which again feels very much like a contrived movie thing. And I just feel like it's, again, just maybe it's the only big problem I have with Chayefsky's writing is that I would prefer if it wasn't in the movie, and he made the movie work without that.
Yeah, it didn't bother me as much as it sounds like it did you, but I do think it's a bit of a distraction from the main storyline. I found some of the scenes between the mom and the aunt, though, I do think it's important because it sort of demonstrates the generation gap that's happening. They talk about these college-educated women, right? Because the daughter-in-law has been to college, and so the aunt thinks that that's why she's just one step away from the street, as she says. And then they find out, oh, Clara's been to college and she's a school teacher. Well, that sounds like trouble too, right? Because she's one of these modern girls. And they even have a conversation with Clara and Mrs. Paletti, which is Marty's mom.
You don't think my sister Katerina should live in her daughter-in-law house?
Well, I don't know them, but as a rule, I don't think a mother-in-law should live with a young couple.
Where you think a mother-in-law should go?
Well, I don't think a mother should depend so much upon her children for her rewards in life.
Well, that's what they teach you in New York University. In a real life, it don't work out like this. You wait until you are a mother.
I liked that conversation happened, even if the catalyst for it is something that's a bit more contrived. I liked hearing those old world and new world kind of perspectives clashing, because I do think that's part of the conflict of the film. Now, you mentioned before I watched this movie that there is a scene that is deleted from some versions. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yes. Did you know what scene it is?
I looked it up later because I was like, well, I can't see anything I would cut out. But
so for some reason, I don't know why this happened. If it's just a mistake that a lot of DVD people have carried over, I don't know the reasons for it, or if the reasons are even known. But I think most releases of it, or at least possibly all the ones except for Kino, a lot of DVD versions, or most other DVD versions of the movie, there's a scene with Claire after Marty brings her back to her apartments where her parents live. He drops her off there, they walk there, and he drops her off, and then she goes up to the room, and her parents are kind of sleeping, and she goes in just to say, I guess, that she's gone back safe and stuff, and she kind of talks in a similar way to the way Marty does in that scene where he just can't stop talking. She just can't stop talking to her parents about how great of a night she's had, and they don't quite get it, and she knows that she's not quite making sense and stuff. And it's this very, very sweet scene, and also the only real scene that she has without Marty in the film. Then after that, they cut away to Marty, who's goes off frolicking, and he's really happy and stuff. For some reason, certain editions will cut that scene out, and he drops her off, and then they just cut to him running around the city happily and stuff. I don't know why. I think it's a great scene, especially for Betsy Blair and her character. It helps feature her and solidify her character and how she feels, and again, lets her show her giddiness for what's happened that night.
I had a wonderful time this evening. I met a fellow. He's a butcher. And, well, we sat in a luncheonette on Grand Concourse, I think, from 9 o'clock until midnight. Talking. That's all we did, talk. I was just trying to figure out why I enjoyed myself so much. We just sat and had pie.
Yeah, I really liked that scene because I like seeing her relay her excitement to her parents, because we've seen Marty's mom interacting with both of them, and, you know, we know her reaction, but seeing her, you know, just overwhelmed with joy and talking to her parents, and they're, you know, it's 1 o'clock or 2 o'clock in the morning at this point, right? So you can see they're perhaps a little bit like, okay, whatever you say, but she's excited, and we get to see that carry through. And then when it goes back to the outdoors where we see Marty running around and like punching signs with joy, you can see, you know, the balance between the two. So yeah, I don't know why that scene would be left out.
Do you like the ending of the movie? Because the ending, I won't say what it is, but it does end rather abruptly. When I first saw the movie and just saw part of it, I was like, oh, that's okay, that's the end, I guess. Do you like that, especially since we've hinted at already that there's this kind of thing that you see a lot of romantic comedies where you're kind of like, are they going to end up together? Are they not going to end up together? And they do have that in this movie. But you don't see them physically anyway kind of get reconcile and get back together. You know they're going to be back together, but you don't really see them physically kind of whatever. So you don't see for me, you don't, in a way, you don't see the payoff of the sadder scenes before. You don't get the kind of satisfaction of seeing them physically kind of embrace each other or whatever. But so do you like well, I guess the abrupt ending? Do you like how they handled them getting back together, so to speak, or whatever? What did you think of how they dealt with those final moments?
I was surprised when it ended where it did, but then as I reflected on it, it felt very poetic, and it felt like in some ways certain things had come full circle, because we talked about that scene early on where he's on the phone and he's being rejected, and it's just so, you know, sad and hard to watch. And then the way this movie ends, I feel like, you know, kind of turns that on its head in some ways. And he also has such a great speech, a great monologue right before the end that I just was like, okay, this is fantastic. And really, even though I'd like to see them back in the same space again, are we going to get something better than that first night that they had together? You know, I think it had such a high there that it's almost better if it is left to our imaginations what happens when they do, you know, make that connection.
I might be a little bit more okay with it if part of my problem with that sequence is the last time we have seen Claire, actually the last time we see Claire in the movie is her, because he says, oh, I'm going to call you tomorrow night and stuff, and he doesn't because of pressure from his mother and his friends. And so when they cut to her, what she's doing that night, she's watching TV with her parents, and she's crying, and she's obviously very upset. And that's the last image in the movie we see of her. Obviously, we can assume that she's happy when he calls her later, I think the next night and stuff, and things are all fine. But the last image we see of her in the movie is her very upset. And I almost think maybe I would be more okay with that scene if, at the very least, we saw maybe just a shot of her side of the conversation on the phone, so that we see her at least happy before the film is over, instead of leaving us with, again, we see her sad, really distraught the last time.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. I don't know. I think it ends really well, though. I like that it bookends the two phone scenes.
Yeah. No, and I'm more okay with it as I've gotten more, I get obviously more used to it and stuff. It's a minor complaint, if anything. Again, I still think the film was brilliant, and Borgnine's great, Betsy Blair is great, the script is great, the direction is great. It's a beautiful film. It's just all around great filmmaking.
Yeah, I would definitely say if you haven't seen this movie, whether you knew about it or not, I think definitely watch it. You won't be disappointed. I mean, we've kind of talked about some of the potential pitfalls, but honestly, I think it's pretty close to flawless. I absolutely.
No, it's
way more people need to discover this movie, I would say.
Yeah, I mean, it's perfect for, especially if you are somebody who's in their mid to late 20s or in their 30s and stuff, and you're questioning life and you're not where you think you should be with romance or with your whatever job prospects you have and stuff, I think you're identified very much with this movie, and maybe it will comfort you in certain ways, knowing that again you have been heard. There are people out there who sympathize with your troubles and you just being maybe kind of a lost person. I think it's very good in that regard.
It's an underdog movie about a couple of underdogs, and I think that's what's great about it.
Okay, so that about wraps us up for today. We do want to talk about some new releases from some of the labels. I do know for Kino, at least from my end, something they announced very recently that's coming on June 29th, as they were releasing 9, and you heard me correct, 9 Mae West films, not only on DVD but on Blu-ray. I don't know if it looks like they're just going to be individual releases, but maybe they're going to do a box set. I'm not quite sure. But it's going to be Night After Night, She Done Him Wrong, which is nominated for Best Picture and one for Best Known Films, I'm No Angel, Belle of the 90s, Going to Town, Klondike Annie, Go West Young Man, Every Day's a Holiday, and My Little Chickadee. I am very much looking forward to those films. I haven't actually ever seen a Mae West film, but I am definitely going to pick up some, if not all of these, when they come out. But I think, Rosalie, you also had some stuff you were kind of eyeing, weren't you?
I was. You totally stole my Mae West one, though.
I'm sorry.
No, it's fine. I'm really excited for that. I have seen She Done Him Wrong and a couple other Mae West films, but I'm really, really psyched for these to get released. I think she's fabulous, and I'm really looking forward to seeing those. So I will let you take that thunder. That's fine. I will talk about another one that's coming out. This one is actually coming out in about a month. And it's from a label I wasn't familiar with, but I think they're primarily in the UK. It's called Artificial Eye. They are releasing a Bong Joon-ho collection on Blu-ray, and it is going to include Barking Dogs Never Bite, Memories of Murder, The Host, Mother, Snowpiercer, and Parasite. So one gigantic set. It looks like only going to be in Region B, so you'd have to have an all-region player if you're in the US, but if you have one of those, then you are definitely in luck. This looks pretty cool. I don't know what kind of extras they're going to have on it yet, but I mean, just having all of his movies in one place and on Blu-ray, I think is pretty cool. So yeah. That one is coming out on March 29th from Artificial Eye. Another one that I found that looks fun that I'm excited for is Shout Factory is going to be releasing Oliver Stone's movie The Hand, starring Michael Caine. And I have not seen this one, but it's an early one from Oliver Stone. I want to say it's from like 1978. Oh wow! And it sounds very interesting. Basically, a guy, a cartoonist loses his hand, and then things go awry from there. So I'm really curious about it. Haven't seen it, but it's one that I'm tempted to just blind buy because it looks really interesting.
Is there an evil hand in it?
I think so. There's an evil hand on the cover. So, I mean, that's enough to persuade me that I definitely, need to see this. I think we've already mentioned, because we talked about it with our friend from Arrow last time, but the Switchblade Sisters Blu-ray from Arrow is coming out on April 18th. So I'm still counting down for that. I was wearing my Switchblade Sisters shirt today, and it just reminded me of it. And then they also have another one that's coming out that looks good called Death Has Blue Eyes. And I love the name, first of all. It has a great eye-catching cover of this giant eyeball, a girl in, a mini skirt and a very scantily clad top holding a gun. Then there's somebody on a motorcycle. It looks like it's an Italian film, and so those are usually fun, and it's from 1976. So it looks like a great giallo, potentially. And I'm super curious about that one.
Scantily clad, you say? I might have to find
that. Exactly. Not sure if this one is U.S. or just UK, but I'll find a way to make it work.
Okay, so one thing we do want to talk about is recently, as we record this anyway, Criterion had a flash sale, and I know we both were able to pick up some stuff. What was some of the stuff that you were able to get, Rosalie?
Well, I tried to restrain myself this time. I wanted to go crazy, but I was fiscally responsible, so I only picked up 2. I picked up Smooth Talk, which I think we mentioned on a previous episode. That one has Laura Dern, very young Laura Dern. And then the documentary Minding the Gap, which focuses on skateboarders in Rockford, Illinois, which is, only about an hour and a half from me.
Oh, I think it was realized it was in Rockford.
Yeah, it was. Bing Liu, who's the filmmaker, is from Rockford, from the area, and he I believe currently is still in Chicago, probably spending some time in LA as well. But in any case, I loved that. That was one of my favorite movies of, I think, was it last year or the year before? I'm kind of losing track of time. It all blends together. But in any case, great documentary, really good movie. And I looked at the special features and I was like, yeah, I need to have this in my collection. So those two are making their way to me. I got the shipping notification in my email today. But you went a little crazier than I did on this sale, if I recall correctly.
Well, I need to be. I always try to be fiscally responsible these days because I don't have as much money as I used to. When I had a better job, I could go. I mean, I think one year I bought like 15 things and stuff. Well, because I bought 10 things, and I was like, okay, I can't buy any more. Then I was an idiot, went to Barnes & Noble, got 2 more things. I was like, I'm not going to buy any more. Then I was an idiot, went back to Barnes & Noble, got 2 more things. And then I went to, one more time. I was like, okay, you really cannot buy any more things after this. So I bought 1 more thing, and then that was it. But I had a much better paying job than I do now, so I could afford to do that. But nowadays, money's a bit tighter, and I really shouldn't be spending that much money, if at all, on these things. But I can't really it's very hard for me to resist a sale. So I went into it, okay, just do what I normally do, add a bunch of stuff to a cart, and then narrow it down to something that's a bit more manageable. I was going to get the Paul, I'm probably going to pronounce the last name wrong, but Paul Robinson, Portraits of an Artist box sets, early African-American filmmaker. Been eyeing that one for a long time. I was thinking of getting that. I was thinking of getting the Agnes Varda set, which I think I mentioned in a previous podcast. I got to hold at Barnes & Noble, and it is beautiful. But I decided against those bigger purchases and decided to get some smaller stuff. And the reason why Rosalie said I went a bit crazy is somebody on Twitter reminded me recently that I had some $10 off coupon that was sent to me by Criterion for whatever reason it was. And I was like, oh, okay, I can finally use that since I always forget to use them. Or I can't use them because they're a Barnes & Noble sale and it doesn't apply for that. So I went to find it, and to my great pleasure and astonishment, I found that I had 5 of them that I had not used over the course of 3 years, that dated back to 2018. And I thought that it was going to stop me from using all of them, but it just kept letting me apply them, so I just kept applying them. So I basically saved like $50, and I got to get 2 extra things in my first purchase, and I'll get to the second one in a moment. But for my first purchase, I got Man Push Cart and Chop Shop, which are both directed by the same guy, and I think I mentioned in a previous podcast, those were looking very interesting to me, so I got that. I also got Minding the Gap because Rosalie made me very interested in it. I didn't realize that it was set in Illinois, where we both live, and didn't realize it's a very recent one, right?
Yeah, very recent.
So I didn't realize that either. I thought it was something from like the 90s or something. But then I thought, well, let's get something a bit more fun, let's say, because Man Push Cart, Chop Shop, and Minding the Gap don't really sound fun to me. So I decided to get 2 releases that I thought would be a bit more fun. One is Police Story, or Police Story / Police Story 2, which is Jackie Chan a release, one of his Chinese movies, and I've never seen any of his Chinese movies, so I'll be very, very looking forward to seeing that. And then Lost in America with Albert Brooks, who I love. I haven't seen any of his kind of project movies except for, oh god, what was the first one? Real Life. I've seen Real Life, but I haven't seen any of the other ones. So Lost in America, which I think is a road trip movie, isn't it?
It is, yeah. It
is.
Yeah.
And I love road trip movies, and maybe it's partially because we're stuck inside because of COVID right now, and it's almost summer, that just seemed really fun to me and really kind of helped. Road trip movies, a good one, really kind of rejuvenate me, and just, I don't know why I love them so much, but they're just great. So I'm really looking forward to seeing that. So I bought all those 5. And then I was like, okay, that's done. I'm satisfied. Let's move on to other things. I've spent an hour and a half picking these. Let's get on with my day. And then Criterion very generously, I had, I guess, reached because you get, I think, every time you spend $500, which is kind of sad that I've spent that much money on this, but they will give you a $50 off coupon. And I apparently happened to have reached that this past purchase, so they sent me another $50. And I got to get 2 more things, which again, going along with, I tend to get a lot of dramas and serious things and arty things from Criterion. But again, going along the lines of, I just want to watch something fun. I got Tootsie, which I recently rewatched for the first time in a long time with my wife, who hadn't seen it before. We watched it, I think, late last year. And a movie that I had just recently heard about, never heard about before. It's a Walter Matthau movie called Hopscotch, which has to do with him being a retired spy and stuff, and it just sounded really fun. The premise sounded fun, and it's Walter Matthau, who I love, and stuff, so I just had to buy that too. So those 7 things I got for an insanely low price of money.
That's awesome.
I know. I was very ecstatic. And one of them is on the way. The other one has not been shipped yet, I don't think. But I'm very looking forward to getting those and those arriving.
All right, well, that just about wraps it up for this episode. But first, we want to preview what's coming up in the next couple months. So next month, get ready. Get your, forks and knives ready. Because we are going to be talking about cannibal movies.
Yay!
Yay! We're going to be reviewing Raw, which is a fairly recent one from Julie Ducournau. And then we're also going to be talking about the movie Ravenous, which is getting a new, I believe, a new Blu-ray release. So both of those are very fun, interesting movies. I can't wait to take a bite out of them. And then in April, we're going to be talking about some Sherlock Holmes films. So, Tim, this was your pick. I'll let you talk a little more about that one.
So for the Silent Sherlock month, we're going to be talking about 3, possibly 4 films. The first of which is one that was recently discovered, which we'll probably get more into that when we have that episode. But it's a 1916 silent film with William Gillette, who is a famous stage Sherlock, who made a film adaptation of his famous play. Another one is a 1922 film with John Barrymore, also discovered in the past, not recently, but in the past decade or so, I think, is reconstructed. And then we have possibly a 1914 German silent version of The Hound of the Baskervilles. We may or may not cover that. We'll see. But one we definitely will cover is a 1929 remake or another adaptation of that same story, also German, also Hound of the Baskervilles. 1929 was also the last silent Sherlock Holmes film ever made. So we're going to be talking about those. I am very excited to talk about those. I'm a big Sherlockian, so I've been looking forward to doing this for a very long time. So very excited to get to that one. And then in May, we're kind of up in the air about that, right, Rosalie?
Yes. So we were just talking about this off mic, but we're debating between 2 options. We could either do movies about mothers, which that is a wide open field, lots of good contenders there for Mother's Day, or we might choose a couple movies from Albert Brooks, inspired by Tim's recent purchase of Lost in America, and Albert Brooks just generally being a very interesting and fun filmmaker. So, remains to be seen which one we end up picking. Eventually, we'll perhaps cover both topics, but that's why you just have to keep listening. So, thank you so much for doing that. All right, so that wraps it up for this episode of Blu-ray Boutique. Thank you so much for listening. And if you'd like to find mine or Tim's work elsewhere on the internet, you can do so. I'm on Twitter at Rosalie Lewis, and you can also find some of my writing at fthismovie.com. And Tim is also available online
at Cinema Pack Rats, and we do have a newish Twitter page specifically for the podcast. That's at Blu-ray Boutique.
That's right. And you can also go to our parent website, which is 25yearslatersite.com, for lots of movie, TV coverage. It's a great site. We appreciate their support. And that is where you can find us in between time. So thank you very much. And we'll see you next month for Cannibalism.